Yes. Hey, Julian. Good job, Julian. Excellent. Everybody's so happy for you. Good job. I think we have a child prodigy here. I mean, thank you. He plays the drums so well, and he does a great job. For tomorrow. And I mean, to play that well is nothing short of a miracle. So he is awesome. All right, thank you for a great day to be in the house of the Lord. Now, don't forget we have baptism immediately following the service, so don't run out just yet. In Charisma magazine in February 2004, I was reading this article, and it was As the Storm Subsides. It refers to a minister and his wife's family finally coming to grips with their teenagers' rebellion. Coming to grips with their teenagers' rebellion and hooked on drugs and running the street and got mixed up with the wrong crowd. It's interesting to note about this story. What's interesting to note is that this family was a prominent minister's family. His wife was in the ministry. He was in the ministry. But that did not change their son's choice to get hooked up with the wrong crowd. In fact, this son was raised in a Christian school, participated in Christian organizations, did all of the things that you and I would say, man, we got to get our kids in the right environment. We have to have all of these things happen so our kids won't grow up and go off into the deep end. Well, guess what? It still happened. No matter how hard you try, you can be a pastor, you can be a chaplain, you can be a person, a deacon, a person in the pew. It does not matter. When the storms of life hit, they hit. It does not discriminate. And I've been excited about this message on the storms of life. But guess what? There was hope for this young man. One of his distant cousins or relatives came and told the parents about a teen life center. And that kid is now, as the article, as I read it, was in the teen life center getting the help that he needs. But I submit to you that there are principles that you and I go through or deal with in our lives that we can garner from the text today as we discover, how do I move on after a tragedy? Now, this was a tragedy in the life of this minister's family. How did they move on? They moved on with support. They moved on with love. And so I want to take a few moments this afternoon, I guess, and talk to you about picking up the pieces after the storm. As we continue our series on the storms of life, we must focus on how we should live after the storm. We have to understand that storms will come in our lives. But what we need to do is find a way to move on after the storm. Moving through the storm, we talked about how we can have faith in God, belief in Him, and trust in Him, and how by trusting in God and holding on to Him, even in the middle of the storm, we can make it. And before that, we talked about, can you survive? Can you make it through the storm? Or can you be prepared before the storms hit? So we have covered the basis on the storms of life, but we have to address this subject because a lot of people don't know what to do after the storm hits their lives. How do I move on when the storm has subsided? Now, in our text, the scene opens with Nehemiah in approximately 446 BC, hearing about the condition of Jerusalem after the exile in Babylon. Zerubbabel and Ezra had already led the children of Israel from Babylon back to Jerusalem. Now, you know this is all your old Sunday school lesson. I'm not hitting anything new, am I? Zerubbabel and Ezra. We those names are common, like, all right. Zerubbabel was the one who had the temple rebuilt about 90 years after they had arrived, or 90 years earlier. Within the first 15 years, he had the temple rebuilt. But the walls around Jerusalem were still in ruin. See, the storm had hit. The storm was that they were put in exile for being disobedient. The people of Israel were put in exile in Babylon because of their rebellion. Now Nehemiah comes on the scene. He gets permission from the king and says, "Can I go and rebuild the walls?" It was King Nebuchadnezzar who had put him in captivity, but now it was the king called Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes was the one who gave Nehemiah the permission to rebuild the walls. Look at somebody and say, "I need to pick up the pieces." You see, in that narrative that was read so beautifully, we found that the walls were still in ruin. And the first thing I want to leave with you is this, that to pick up the pieces, it requires a desire for change. If you can go back to the preaching slides. We got a young man, he's doing Ricky Bell up there. Let's give him a hand. Another youth. All right. Picking up the pieces. Now, Ricky, you're going to have to follow along and flow with me. He's like, oh my Lord, he's putting his hand on his head. What am I going to do now? But picking up the pieces requires a desire for change. In Nehemiah 1, 4, and 5, it says, "When I heard these things, I sat down and I wept. For some days I mourned, I fasted, and I prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love, and those who love him and obey his command." So he called out to God. But Nehemiah had a desire for change. It was something he saw. He saw the condition of the walls. There were broken rocks all around. And Nehemiah was wondering, how come nothing had been done? Nehemiah wanted to pick up the pieces, but it started because he had compassion in his heart for what he was seeing. Now, Nehemiah, by the way, the name means the Lord comforts. The Lord comforts. So he was a man of comforting. He was a man to help and lead others. Nehemiah was a true leader. He's a true man of God who set in place some very strong principles. And that first thing is that he says there needs to be a change. He was weeping about the condition of the walls. That is, he had compassion. Now, inside, for your visitors, there is a place to take notes inside of your grapevine. And you will find a place to write down your notes to follow the sermon. Now, he had compassion for the destitute state of Jerusalem. No protection, no identity. The people were in disarray. In those days, if you did not have a protection around the walls of the city, you were vulnerable to the attacks of the enemy. And so he says we must pick up the pieces. I think there's so much in that in our lives we have to be careful about staying in our devastated state. I think that's why when 9/11 hit and the devastation happened with the World Trade Centers, the towers, they had to figure out, what are we going to put in its place? You remember all of the debate? What are we going to build? We can't just let it sit there. There has to be a sense that we are not defeated by the enemy. There has to be a sense of moving on. It has to be a sense that there's something greater. Even though the storm has hit my life and now passed, what am I to do now is the question. So Nehemiah had this compassion and he prayed to the Lord. Number two, he prayed day and night. I wish we can get that kind of compassion when we deal with our life situation and say, Lord, I need to pray about this. Lord, I need to call on you. And the Bible says he didn't just pray, but he prayed day and night. He says, I'm in a covenant with you, God. You are my God. A covenant means, we learned this morning, didn't we? A covenant means a promise. It is a condition. It is a relationship between two parties where both have responsibilities. And so Nehemiah was saying that because I am in this covenant with you, God, I know you hear my prayer. We can learn from Nehemiah that anytime you're going to do anything in life, if you're going to get your life back together, if you're going to pick up the pieces after the storm, one of the first things we have to do is pray. We have to pray. We have to fast. And that's why we're so big on the prayer walk that is coming up. We have a prayer walk that is coming up on the 24th, which is tomorrow. Is that 23rd? Tomorrow. We have a prayer walk at 5 o'clock. Somebody said, well, you're doing too much church stuff. Well, we need to pray for our community. And we're going to walk the walls, walk the streets. And we're going to pray for people. We're not going to beat them up. We're not going to accost anyone. So I want to see you out there tomorrow, 5:30. 5:30 gives you a chance to come home. We don't have food tomorrow. I'm going to warn you right now. Everybody says, you have food, I'll be there, Pastor. No, we don't have food. But we want you to pray. It is something to pray for our community. That's why the revival has taken place in our community. That's why people are talking about what the choir is doing, singing in the BX courtyard. Because of prayer. And you know, Chaplain Johnson and I told this story so many times. We would be on our knees right here, week after week, when I first arrived 2 years ago, praying every day, praying for revival, praying for the Spirit of the Lord to break out in this place. And I believe He did it. I believe through prayer, and not just our prayer, but your prayer, your fasting, it makes a difference. And so not only did he pray, but he fasted. He fasted, and no one knows how many days, but he said, Lord, I need your guidance. Lord, I need your direction. And see, the question for us this morning is, what are the situations that we see in our lives that are broken and devastated by the storms of life? What areas need our attention? What areas need our examination? It is hard to pick up the pieces, though, in our lives when you don't believe that change can happen. If you're going to move on, you have to believe that change can happen. When I was on scholastic probation in 1983 and had to sit out a semester because I wasn't smart enough. No, I was smart enough. I just didn't go to class because I was shooting pool and I thought I was a pool shark. I was going to be famous. But no, I'm just joking. But I did shoot a lot of pool. And when I did not make it, and I was kicked out of school, my life could have ended right there. I could have just gave up and said, no, I'm not good enough. But I had to know that there was something on the inside of me saying you can go back to school. And so I stand before you now 4 degrees later, technically 5 degrees, about to get number 6. But it's not for me. It is because change can happen. You have to realize, just as I had to realize, that God is able. We have to start looking at our devastation and our brokenness and seeing the possibility that God can change it. Because with God, nothing is impossible. So you have to change your mind. I think this is what Nehemiah saw. He said, I don't see broken walls. I see walls being rebuilt. I don't see a broken marriage. I see my marriage being restored. You may have been divorced already. I don't see divorce as an end. I'm moving on. I will find the right mate for me. I'm beautifully and wonderfully made. The loss of my child is not the end of my childbearing days. My child won't always be rebellious. My money won't always be lacking. Lord, I am learning how to hope again, even though life seems hopeless.